So in this example, I'm going to give a basic chain and then move on to a much longer chain. So I activate Lightning Vortex, and in order to activate it I have to discard a card, so I choose to discard Sanguine in order to activate it. And so now I've activated it and Lightning Vortex has started the chain. My opponent decides to respond, and so they respond with Starlight Road. And at this point I look at my hand and I look at my field and I decide that I have nothing to respond to it with, so I choose not to respond. So they choose not to respond to this, and so therefore the chain resolves, and the chain will resolve backwards, so Starlight Road will resolve first, and then would negate and destroy my vortex, so it will negate it and then destroy it. And then after it is negated and destroyed it, my opponent chooses to activate its ability to special summon a Stardust, which is a choice made at resolution of Starlight Road. And then Vortex effect will still linger here, but it will just resolve with no effect because it's been negated and it's been destroyed. And then after the chain is resolved, Starlight Road will go to the graveyard, and that will be the entire chain. When I activate Vortex, and I'm assuming that I don't know any of the back rows, but I assume that because they have 3 back rows and 3 monsters that they might have Starlight Road set. So when I activate Lightning Vortex, I will instead choose to discard my Jinzo. And so, at activation of Lightning Vortex, Jinzo is in the graveyard. My opponent responds the same way as before. They respond with Starlight Road, and then, because it meets its activation requirements, so they chain Starlight Road to Lightning Vortex in order to negate it and destroy it and then get their Stardust out. I choose to then chain my Call of the Haunted, and at activation of this, I target my Jinzo in grave. So, and at this point they choose not to respond to that, and then I choose not to respond to my own call, so now the chain resolves, and Call of the Haunted will resolve first since it's the last thing on the chain. So Call of the Haunted will resolve first, special summoning out Jinzo, and then Jinzo's effect doesn't start a chain and doesn't need to get its own chain, so it just comes into play when Jinzo comes into play. So right now, Call is resolved, Jinzo is now in play, and his effect has just come into play. And so now, Call is resolved, Jinzo's on the board, and now after Call is resolved, now Starlight Road will resolve. However, now Starlight Road is a trap card, and so its effect will be negated by Jinzo. So while it's resolving, it will resolve but with no effect. So it won't get destroyed yet, because Jinzo doesn't say to destroy, it just negates it. So Starlight Road will be negated, and will not be able to do anything in order to negate Lightning Vortex. So the next up, Lightning Vortex will resolve, and will send all my opponent's monsters to the graveyard. And then after the chain has resolved, Lightning Vortex will go to the grave, and Starlight Road will go to the grave. And that is how that chain resolves. Okay, so moving on. So if I do the same thing again, so I use Lightning Vortex to clear the board, and I choose to discard Jinzo, and my opponent chains Starlight Road, and then I choose to chain my Call of the Haunted, and at activation I target the Jinzo that has been put in the graveyard when Lightning Vortex was activated, or in order to activate Lightning Vortex. Now my opponent then chooses to respond to my Call of the Haunted, and they chain their MST to target my Call of the Haunted. And then I choose to not respond. I don't really have anything to respond with because my other cards are in my hand, so I'm just kind of like, uh-oh. So they choose to chain MST to target my Call of the Haunted. So now the chain will resolve, and it will resolve backwards. So their MST will resolve first. So MST resolve, and my Call of the Haunted will be sent to the graveyard. Next up, Call of the Haunted will resolve, but continuous spell and trap cards require that they stay on the field in order for their effects to resolve. So now Call of the Haunted will resolve with no effect. And then moving on, then Starlight Road will now resolve and negate and destroy Lightning Vortex. And then my opponent will choose to use its optional effect and special summon out their Stardust Dragon. And then finally, Lightning Vortex will resolve with no effect, and then the chain will resolve, and these 2 cards will go to the graveyard. Okay, for this next example, we're going to say that we actually have 2 calls set instead of just the one. So now we start off with the same move as we did before. We discard Jinzo to activate Lightning Vortex to destroy all face-up monsters that my opponent controls. They, in response, activate their Starlight Road because it has met its activation requirements. And now I choose to activate my Call of the Haunted in response to their Starlight Road, and I target my Jinzo. And then they choose to chain their MST in response to the activation of my Call of the Haunted, and they choose, at activation of MST, they target my Call of the Haunted. Now, since they're going to destroy the call, and I can see this, that what's going to happen is my Call of the Haunt's going to get destroyed, so my Jinzo's not going to come out, so then their Starlight Road's going to go through, so then I choose to chain a second Call of the Haunted. And since my Jinzo is still in the graveyard, I can target that exact same Jinzo. So now the way this chain will work is this call will resolve first. Oh, sorry. And so I activate call, my opponent chooses not to respond, and then I choose not to respond. So then the chain resolves. And so then it will resolve backwards, so Jinzo will be special summoned for this Call of the Haunted. And so this Call of the Haunted resolves, and then next up this MST will resolve, and this will go to the graveyard. And then this call will resolve with no effect because it's no longer face-up on the field. And then this Starlight Road will then resolve with no effect because its effect is currently being negated by Jinzo. This Lightning Vortex will then resolve just fine and will destroy all their monsters. And then after that, these three cards will go to the graveyard. This one will stay because it's a continuous. So now I go activate Lightning Vortex, same as before, discarding Jinzo, destroying all their monsters. Basically same as before, so they activate Starlight Road, I activate Call in response, then they activate their MST targeting that call, and then I activate my call, and this is where I left off before. And so then I ask them if they have anything they want to respond with, and they respond that they do have something to respond with, and they respond with DD Crow. So they chain DD Crow to the activation of this call targeting this Jinzo. So they chain their DD Crow and they target Jinzo. Now at this point I don't have anything to respond with, so I say that I do not wish to respond, and then they choose to not respond, so now the chain resolves. And Jinzo gets removed by DD Crow's effect. And then this call then resolves without effect because the monster is no longer there at resolution. So this Call of the Haunted resolves and just sits there doing nothing. Then this MST resolves and destroys this Call of the Haunted. And then this Starlight Road resolves and with effect and negates and destroys the Lightning Vortex. And at resolution my opponent chooses to special summon out their Stardust Dragon. And then the Lightning Vortex resolves with no effect because it got negated. And then the whole chain resolves and these two go to the graveyard. Okay, moving on, this next example is going to involve Spell Speed 3 cards. So we start off with the same as before. We activate Lightning Vortex, discarding Jinzo in order to activate it. My opponent responds with Starlight Road. I then chain Call of the Haunted to their Starlight Road, targeting Jinzo at activation. They then chain Solemn Judgment in response to negate this Call of the Haunted. And at this point I cannot chain Call of the Haunted to that in order to get out Jinzo and negate all the traps because this is now a Spell Speed 3. So now the only cards that I can activate in response to this card would be a Spell Speed 3 card. Also, before I continue, the cost to activate Solemn Judgment is 4,000 life points. So they pay 4,000 life points in order to activate this. So now they activate it, and then I choose to respond because I don't want the Starlight Road to go through and I want to get rid of their monsters. So I choose to respond, and I chain my Dark Bribe. So, and there's no activation cost for Dark Bribe, so nothing happens yet. And then I ask my opponent if they wish to chain anything, and they choose not to. So then now the chain resolves. So Dark Bribe will resolve first, and will negate the activation and destroy this card, and then my opponent will then draw one card. Next up, Solemn Judgment will resolve, but its effect will be negated, or the activation of its effect will be negated, and it has already been destroyed. Then Call of the Haunted will resolve, and Jinzo will be special summoned out, and then the chain goes on from there, as same as before. Okay, this will be the last example. So to start off with, we have the same as before where we activate Lightning Vortex, and in order to activate, we discard the Jinzo. So now Lightning Vortex has been activated. My opponent meets the activation requirements, so they choose to chain Starlight Road in order to negate and destroy this and get out of Stardust. And then I choose to activate Call of the Haunted, and I target my Jinzo. My opponent, in response, discards their DD Crow and chain to my Call of the Haunted. Oh, discarding it's the cost, so they discard to activate it. And then at activation they target the Jinzo. I then choose to chain my second Call of the Haunted and target that Jinzo that they are targeting with their DD Crow. And then they choose to chain MST, and they target this second Call of the Haunted. And at activation they target. And then, so I then chain my Dark Bribe to negate their MST. And at this point, the level of spell speeds has now been brought up from spell speed 1 to spell speed 2. All these are spell speed 2s. And now the spell speed has now been brought up to spell speed 3. So at this point in the chain, only spell speed 3 cards can be chained. And they choose to chain their Solemn Judgment. So now in order to activate it, they pay half their life points, which is 2,000. So now they've paid half their life points in order to activate Solemn Judgment. And at this point I don't have anything that I can really do, so I say I don't respond, and then they choose not to respond. And so now the chain resolves. So Solemn Judgment will resolve first, and it will negate the activation of the trap card and destroy the trap card. So now Dark Bribe will get destroyed. Next up, Dark Bribe will resolve, but will resolve with no effect because its activation of its effect has been negated, or the activation of the card has been negated. So it will basically fizzle. And then next up, MST will resolve, and its effect has not been negated by Dark Bribe because Dark Bribe didn't go through, its activation was negated. So now MST goes through just fine, and this Call of the Haunted gets destroyed. And then this Call of the Haunted now resolves with no effect because it's no longer on the field. And then next up, DD Crow resolves, removing the monster it targeted. So now Jinzo gets removed from play when DD Crow resolves. And then next up, this Call of the Haunted will now resolve, but now it will resolve with no effect because Jinzo is no longer in the graveyard. So it'll basically fizzle. Now this Starlight Road will resolve, and its effect will negate and destroy Lightning Vortex. And my opponent will choose to special summon Stardust at resolution of this effect. And then Lightning Vortex will resolve with no effect because its effect was negated by Starlight Road. So it will resolve with no effect. And then the chain will resolve, and these cards will all go to the graveyard. Call of the Haunted will stay because it resolved with no effect, but it's a continuous, so unless it gets destroyed by something, it's just going to sit there doing nothing. And that's it. Channel MST signing off.